Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin is ready to halt the war in Ukraine with a negotiated ceasefire that recognizes the current battlefield lines, says reports. The European Union denounces Russia's remarks and the removal of the buoys marking the border with Estonia on the Niger River. Now, the bloc calls Moscow's actions provocative and unacceptable. US President Joe Biden hosts a gala dinner at the White House for his Kenyan counterpart, William Ruto. The two leaders sign a string of deals on security, debt and climate as Biden pledged to designate Kenya a non-NATO ally. President Jacob Zuma vows to fight for his rights after the country's top court barred him from running for elections, given his 2021 jail sentence. And Seoul says it has detected signs that North Korea was preparing to launch another military spy satellite just days before the leaders of South Korea, China and Japan meet. Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Africa's nuclear race is heating up. Countries across the continent want to expand access to electricity. For this, they are turning to nuclear power as a low-carbon energy source, as over 600 million people still live without power. While the race may be new for Africa, the competitors remain the same. So it is Russia and China against the United States and some of its allies. In Ghana, the United States, Russia, China, France and South Korea are competing to build the country's first nuclear power plant. Ghana is considering companies from all 5 countries to build the plant. Accra says it will choose a company by December. Now, France's EDF, the US-based NuScale Power and Regnum Technology Group, and South Korea's Korean Electric Power Corporation are in the race. From Russia and China, it is state-owned Rosatom and China's National Nuclear Corporation. Ghana started the construction of a nuclear power plant in the 1960s, but the process was derailed by a coup. After a devastating power crisis in 2005, the plan to build the nuclear plant was revived in 2006 with the help from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations nuclear watchdog. Now, Ghana is among several African nations turning to nuclear power. Burkina Faso and Uganda have both signed agreements with Russia and China. This to construct their first nuclear power plants. Kenya and Namibia are also working to integrate nuclear energy into their power grids. Egypt has also awarded a $25 billion contract to Russia's Rosatom for a power plant, which began construction in 2022 with planned completion in 2028. Morocco, too, has signed an agreement with Russia to construct reactors. The sole nuclear power plant in Africa is operated by South Africa. Now, the two nuclear reactors generate 5% of the country's electricity, but electricity supply continues to remain unstable, with businesses and households facing frequent rolling blackouts. Pretoria is addressing its energy crisis by announcing plans to construct new nuclear power stations. Experts say demand for electricity across Africa will grow multiple times by 2050. The continent also needs to achieve net zero emissions by the same year. Nuclear power is widely seen as a potential source of clean power to drive industries and grow incomes. So, in Africa, the nuclear energy sector is becoming the new geopolitical battleground. The West has pushed hard to wean itself off Russian fossil fuel and has imposed energy sanctions on Moscow in response to the ongoing war in Ukraine. But Russia's nuclear sector exports have proven harder to kick. The Kremlin is still taking in the rubles from strong nuclear sector exports. In order to stay afloat, Russia needs to form more alliances and options for export. So Africa, which is searching for megawatts, is a crucial market for Russia. Beijing, too, has placed itself at the nexus of global clean energy supply chains. With Moscow's attention and resources caught up in a war and the West cutting Russia out of its nuclear energy supply chains, China seems to have an upper hand. Can the US and its allies tackle Russia and China's consolidation of power over global energy markets? Now, for more on this, we are being joined by Macharia Munene, who is a professor of history and international relations, who is joining us live from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you for being with us, Professor.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be with you.
Now, it seems that Africa's nuclear energy sector is becoming the new geopolitical battleground. What are your thoughts on this?
First, many African countries are realizing that they need alternative to the existing supplies, whether it's oil or gas, because they have been very volatile and unreliable, especially in times of crisis. There is also the impression that nuclear power is solid, is more reliable, and does not necessarily rely on the volatility of rival powers. Once you have it, it's supposed to be clean and long-lasting in that. So there is an element of reliability. The increasing number of African countries who want to have the nuclear energy capacity is also an attraction to the big players, those who already have the capacity. And that's what we are seeing. Major producers, or whether it's Russia, which is doing very well, whether it's the United States, which is not doing very well, or Korea or France, which has some geopolitical problems in Africa, and China, which seems to have some arrangement, one would say. It seemed to have a little advantage because they started working on the infrastructure in Africa long before the others. They started thinking about it. So since energy is a major attraction in the world, whoever can supply it to a growing market, and the African market is going to be bigger than it is, will have a small advantage over the others. Hence the stiff competition as to who gets the chance.
Right. Now, Professor, in what ways could China's significant investments in Africa's infrastructure, including nuclear energy, influence the country's energy policies and its relationships with other global powers?
Well, the Chinese have a small advantage in that they have been very committed to developing infrastructure in various African countries. And with the infrastructure in place, they have an advantage of even building the nuclear plants that will come, because whoever gets the contract will soon need the infrastructure, which is mostly Chinese controlled or influenced. So there is the correlation that whoever gets the contract will still have to deal with the reality of the Chinese presence in terms of the infrastructure. Now, as to the other countries, how to outdo or maybe compete with China, I think the West in general has a problem of attitude. And the attitude of the Western powers, particularly towards Africa, tends to be condescending and therefore repulsive in nature, not to mention those other factors that go into it. The West has a habit of delaying delivery. So part of the reason they lose to the Chinese and I guess now increasingly Russians is that the West does not deliver, makes a lot of promises, and then it starts looking for conditions and reasons why it cannot deliver. And you put that in contrast with their counterparts, who are very good in delivering and appearing to deliver. Once you agree on the terms and whatever it is, they tend to be very quick to be seen to deliver. And that in itself is an attraction, not to mention that their prices tend to be better than the prices by the other people. How they get their prices better is another story. But they do deliver, they do have better prices, they deliver, and most important, their attitude is very positive. They try their best not to appear to be insulting the host countries. So while the others are insulting the host countries, of course, there is repulsion. The Chinese and increasingly the Russians go out of their way to understand the host and the environment in which they are going to operate. That in itself is an attraction to the potential customer of the nuclear energy. So a lot of factors are likely to go into it. Before a decision like the one in Ghana, they say they're going to do it by December. Before they say it is this one or that one, they'll have to consider all those other connecting factors in order, because they can decide one way, only end up losing in another. So the Chinese presence is, it can be dealt with, but you need to be very careful and to think deeply about the relations with African countries and people from a positive to a positive side, from condescending attitude.
And Professor, just finally, in your opinion, can the US and its allies tackle Russia and China's consolidation of power over the global energy markets?
They can try. There is nothing wrong with that, because the more they offer as competition, as alternative to what the Chinese and the Russians are offering, they'll have to offer something better than what the Chinese or the Russians are offering. If they do not offer something better, then they can forget it. If they continue with the condescending attitudes, with the insult to Africans and all those things, and chest thumping, and failure to deliver on what they promise, because they are very good at making promises and failing to deliver. In Kenya, we could have a few examples where we keep on pointing out, you promise this, but they always look for reasons why they cannot deliver, whatever it is. So they need to change their attitude. They need to compete fairly with the Russians and the Chinese, and they should not expect that the Africans will stop dealing with the Russians or the Chinese simply because they say so. They have to prove the need. I mean, they should show the evidence that they are better. So far, they have not shown that they are better. And that's what they have. But when they can play their geopolitical game on saying, we stand for this, that, that's a lot of hogwash. It's because when it comes down to it, they are all pushing their interest. And the question is, who pushes its interest the best possible way that's acceptable to most of the countries? And so far, that's why the Chinese have a slight edge but they can compete. They can try and offer something better, but they have to take those factors into account if they're going to match the Chinese or the Russians in the energy or any other sector.
Yeah. Right. Professor, thank you very much for your time and for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
My pleasure.
Moving to West Africa now, where a tit-for-tat conflict between Niger and Benin is escalating. A border dispute between the two countries has been heating up. Niger has refused to open its border with its neighboring Benin, owing to security issues. Now, specifically terrorist activities. The Prime Minister of Niger, Ali Mohamed Lamine Zein, says that these security threats are being fueled by the French. He has accused the French of training terrorists near the border region with the aim to destabilize Niger. He said, and I quote, "Benin has the largest and most dangerous base on the edge of the national park where these soldiers train terrorists." Niger's Prime Minister has now urged businesses to ship their items to Togo. Now, this is despite the fact that a bilateral road transport deal between Niger and Benin had been established in the past. Back in February, West African bloc ECOWAS, or the Economic Community of West African States, lifted sanctions imposed on Niger's military rulers.
Closure of land and air borders between ECOWAS countries and Niger to be lifted. No-fly zone of all commercial flights to and from Niger is to be lifted. Suspension of all commercial and financial transactions between ECOWAS member states and Niger is to be lifted.
At the time, Benin, which is a part of ECOWAS, also announced the opening of its border with Niger. However, the border has remained closed on the Niger side. This irritated the Benin president, Patrice Talon, who said that Niger was treating them like an enemy. And now, as Niger refuses to budge, tensions between the two countries are only on the rise. Now, amid a reciprocal border conflict, Benin has closed a river crossing between the two countries. Earlier this month, Benin had blocked China's first oil shipment from Niger over the same border. And this was crucial for Niger because it was a part of a trade deal with China. China had loaned $400 million to Niger, which the country intends to repay by exporting oil. Notably, Niger's border with Algeria, Libya and Chad are still open. So it remains to be seen whether Niger and Benin reach a common ground or if Niger devises new trade routes with its friendlier neighbors. For over a year now, Sudan has been in the grip of a deadly civil war. Around 8.5 million Sudanese have been forced to flee their homes since the start of the war, which has Sudan military commander Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan on one side and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Force, or the RSF, led by Lieutenant General Dagalo on the other side. The battle in the capital Khartoum has been fierce, with bloody clashes on the streets. A series of ceasefires have failed to bring the civil war to an end. In fact, fighting is getting even more intense, and funding the civil war in Sudan are sodas, chocolates, and chewing gums. Yes, you heard that right, and we'll tell you how. For this, we need to digress a bit from the guns and violence to gum arabic. Around 80% of the world's gum arabic is harvested from Sudan's acacia trees. Now, these trees grow in the desert belt that stretches from Sudan's western border with Chad to its eastern border with Ethiopia. So what exactly is gum arabic? Well, it's a little-known ingredient used while making chocolates, sodas, and chewing gums, and many other consumer goods. Sudan is the world's largest producer of the raw gum, which is a major source of foreign currency for the country. According to a Wall Street Journal report, This has become a key source of funding for both sides in the war. Al Obeid, which is one of the main agricultural hubs in Sudan, is controlled by the army. But last year, the RSF laid siege, controlling 3 out of the 4 major access roads to the city. Reports say that traders are forced to pay off the AK-47-wielding paramilitary forces at checkpoints to enter or exit these major agricultural hubs and routes. Traders say those who refuse to pay risk losing their cargo and vehicles to the militia. On the other hand is the Sudanese military, the de facto government, that levies taxes and other tariffs on the gum arabic trade. Now, according to the report, tiny amounts of gum arabic are added to some of the world's most popular consumer products, now including Coca-Cola, M&Ms, and popular chewing gums. It is even used in cosmetics and pharmaceutical products. Experts say the proceeds from the gum arabic exports are directly financing the fighting in Sudan. Despite these concerns, a few companies have taken steps to ensure that they avoid Sudanese arabic gum, like Nestle, which adds gum arabic to chocolates and says that, according to its suppliers, the small quantities it uses comes from Chad, Niger, and Mali. A spokesperson for Hershey told Wall Street Journal that the company expects all of its suppliers to adhere to all laws in the countries in which they operate. A Ferrero spokesperson also told the Wall Street Journal that it has strict due diligence measures that its suppliers comply with. But some companies also say stopping purchases of Sudanese gum arabic will hurt the thousands of people in the country who depend on the trade for their livelihoods, at a time when the risk of a famine looms over the African country. Because gum arabic is one of Sudan's main agricultural exports. Now, for the people of Sudan, the last few years have been harrowing. There has been indiscriminate violence, bombings, killings. The civil war has pushed millions into extreme hunger and to the edge of famine. The WHO says about 3.5 million children under the age of 5 have acute malnutrition. The war has created the world's largest displacement crisis. Thousands are still fleeing the country in desperation, and it has also triggered waves of ethnic attacks and horrifying instances of sexual violence in the Darfur region. As the turmoil intensifies, humanitarian aid for Sudan is crucial, but access remains limited in many areas. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the stories of coups and crises, we get you tales of hope and positivity that often get overlooked, but not on this show. Now, today, our story is a testament to Morocco's fighting spirit. As years of drought threaten the country's agriculture sector, scientists have developed new strains of climate-resilient crops. Around 50 new species of grains, legumes, and oilseeds are being made. It not only aims to offset a drop in agricultural yield, but also to boost crop production by 50%. So even as Morocco battles this climate crisis, the country is already preparing for its future.
Years of drought, an acute water shortage, Morocco has endured some of the harshest impacts of human-induced climate change, but that has not discouraged people in the North African country. In fact, it has only strengthened their resolve to fight the climate crisis. As Morocco steps into its 6th consecutive year of dry spell, scientists in the country have devised a method to combat crop shortage. They have developed new strains of food crops that are resilient to the adverse effects of climate change. Morocco's Institute for Agricultural Research has come up with around 50 new species of grains, legumes, and oilseeds. They have been tailored to respond to the drop in agricultural yield. Scientists expect the new climate-resilient crops to boost production by a massive 50%, and although the research into the crops remains in the early stages, trials have already begun in various locations like Garb, Ses, and Tadla in central Morocco. In the past, occasional drought in Morocco were followed by periods of rain, but now, the country is assumed to have entered a prolonged dry spell, and years of dry weather have threatened the agriculture sector.
There is a severe drought this year, which led to a rise in the cost of fodder and a decrease in the production of livestock, such as sheep and goats, which did not reproduce as before.
Agriculture is a crucial sector in Morocco. It accounts for roughly 14% of the country's exports and employs a third of the country's working-age population. So, disruptions in the sector are likely to severely threaten Morocco's food security. To counter that, the country has introduced the Green Generation 2020 to 2030 strategy. The plan was launched by Morocco's King Mohammed VI in February 2020. It aims to develop a sustainable model of agriculture.
Successive years of drought prompted the Ministry of Agriculture to implement a set of programs and strategies that were implemented at the regional level, at the level of our office, the Regional Office for Agricultural Investment in Malouya. It was implemented even at the level of the irrigation networks, and also the main canals that supply the region with irrigation water and drinking water as well.
The plan seeks to increase agricultural exports to $6.4 billion and the agriculture GDP to $26.5 billion by the end of the decade. Now, even as large swathes of lands go barren, and climate change brings a whole new set of uncertainties, resilient Morocco is preparing for its future with new inventions and government programs. The country is shifting its focus to finding solutions rather than lamenting its loss.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again on Monday at the same time. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend and goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Fast and Factual. My name is Utsaf Parekh and here are the top stories of the day.